about 15 years ago. Or I guess 13 years ago. Shortly before I lost my voice. In 2013, I was cast in a production of Les Miserables, which was a dream of mine since I was 7 years old, and I first saw it. I was just ensemble, but that didn't matter. I was part of the show. However, 2 weeks into music rehearsals, I started losing my high notes. At first, I thought I was just sick. And I did all the things that a singer does. I went on vocal rest. I drank lots of tea and honey and tried just to see if it would come back. But it didn't. I did the entire run of the show with practically no singing voice whatsoever. My speaking voice was also not great. The only one of my solos that I had that actually came out at all and actually worked was the bleeding horror solo. You know, the God, I'm weary, sick enough to drop, belly burns like fire, will the bleeding never stop? You know, that one. And actually the voice sounded good with that. But everything else, there was nothing. So I did the entire run of the show. And probably 3 months later, I was finally able to get in to see an ENT, ear, nose, and throat doctor. And he did a scope, took the camera, went up through the nose and down into my throat. It's as unpleasant as it sounds. And he took it out, sat down, and said, well, it looks like you have papilloma. And in my brain, I'm like, you mean polyps? And he's like, no, papilloma. Growths caused by the human papilloma virus, HPV. Now, I knew what HPV was. And I knew how serious it was. And I also knew that it could turn into cancer. So, he immediately scheduled me for a procedure to have those growths removed from my left vocal cord, because that's where they were, right on the left vocal cord. And so we did that. And they came back not cancerous, but precancerous, which is a distinction. And I was good for a couple more years. I even was able to start kind of singing a little again. And then my voice started getting rough again. So I went back to the same ENT. He told me I had scar tissue. And that was causing strain on the vocal cord. So he went in to remove that scar tissue. When he was in there, he said that he saw a disturbing amount of swelling directly on the left vocal cord, and he had biopsied that tissue, and the HPV apparently had mutated and was now in the tissue of my vocal cord. So he scheduled another procedure, this time to go in and shave off the top layer of my left vocal cord. When he went in for that one, they found a new growth on my false cord, which is kind of a fold that's just above the vocal cord voice box. And the biopsy for that one came back positive for cancer. Because it had essentially moved from one location to another, it was stage 2. It was still a very treatable form of cancer. So he referred me to a oncologist who was literally in the building next door. And, he did his evaluation, and he's like, okay, so we're gonna have to do 29 sessions of concentrated radiation on your throat. All of this was like November, December of 2016 into January. Do you know how much it sucks not being able to swallow during Thanksgiving or Christmas? Yeah. I eventually got to the point where my neck looked like somebody put a hot iron to it, or frying pan, and I was coughing up pieces of my throat. And I certainly could not talk. As a singer and an actor, this is devastating. But I made it through it. And I was fine for a few more years. About 9 years. And then in 2022, I started seeing an endocrinologist because there was a node that was found on my thyroid. And they had me do a biopsy of it. And it was months before I ever found out the results about that one. That was apparently some sort of clerical error on the part of the lab. But my endocrinologist actually had to go looking for them when I asked her. And she finally called me and said, so it did come back positive for a cancer. And she said, I'm recommending that you have a full thyroidectomy, and then you have to do a radioactive iodine pill and isolate. This was in, I want to say 2024? Yeah, May of 2024. I had my thyroid removed. They, when they removed it, they removed also about 14 pouches of lymph nodes, and 8 of those also came back cancerous. But they were pretty sure they got all of it. And then Several months later, in November, I had to do the radioactive iodine, and I had to isolate from everyone, especially my son, who was 2 years old at the time, which was one of the hardest things I ever had to do. It was also really cold because I was staying in a travel trailer at a RV park for those 10 days. And of course, it had to be one of the few times it snowed in Albuquerque. So I was freezing. But I did it. And now I am left with a scar, discoloration, a much weaker voice than I used to have, and I'm having to relearn basically how to talk and have enough voice to sustain me through a show. This is a very humbling thing for someone who was always just able to belt out these gorgeous high notes with no effort whatsoever. I want you all to join me on my adventure of trying to get my voice back and being a working, successful actor.